The train screeched to a halt under a sky bruised purple with the coming dawn. Steam hissed across the cracked boards of Dry Creek Station, wrapping the platform in ghostly fog. When the smoke cleared, the conductor froze where he stood, because there, alone beside a broken trunk, was a young woman clutching a crying baby. Her eyes were wild, her hair tangled, and she looked around as though she'd been dropped from the heavens. "Miss, where's your ticket?" the conductor asked. She stared at him blankly. I don't know." The man frowned, wiping his hands on his vest. "What's your name, ma'am?" The woman blinked again, her lips trembling. "I can't remember." The baby wailed louder. The passengers muttered and shuffled away, not wanting to be part of whatever this was. When the train pulled off, leaving a long whistle echoing across the empty plain, the woman was still standing there, alone, nameless, with nothing but a child in her arms and a locket around her neck. The sheriff came by later. He asked questions, but her answers made no sense. She remembered flashes, rain, a gunshot, a scream, the baby's face, but not much more. The sheriff, a tired man named Boyd, sighed and said she could stay in the old station house until they figured out what to do with her. So she stayed. Days passed, then weeks. Folks in town began calling her the lost girl. They'd drop food by sometimes, bread from Mrs. Lang's bakery, milk from the church ladies, but no one dared get close. She didn't talk much, only rocked her baby, humming soft songs that made no sense. Then, one dusty afternoon, everything changed. A horse's hooves echoed down the main road, slow, heavy, deliberate. The man riding it was tall and lean, his face hidden beneath the brim of a weathered hat. His duster coat was caked with dust, his boots cracked with miles of riding. He tied his horse outside the saloon, ignored the eyes that followed him, and walked toward the station with the calm of someone who feared nothing and felt nothing. His name was Caleb Ward. Folks said he'd lost his voice after the war, that he hadn't spoken a full sentence in 5 years. He lived out on the edge of the desert on a ranch that had once belonged to his family, before fever took his wife and boy. He was a ghost of a man. But when he reached that station platform, he stopped. The woman sat there, rocking the child in her lap, her eyes distant. Caleb stood a few paces away, watching. She looked up, startled, clutching the baby tighter. "Do you need something, sir?" she asked, her voice rough from silence. He didn't answer. He just studied her face. Sunburned cheeks, cracked lips, blue eyes that carried both fear and something fragile. Hope. Finally, he set something on the platform between them, a small sack of bread and jerky. Then he turned and walked away. The next day he came back, and the day after that. He never said a word, just left food or a blanket, sometimes a bottle of milk for the baby. The woman began to look for him each evening, waiting for the sound of his boots on the platform. One night she tried to thank him. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. "We'll be fine." He just nodded and turned to go. But before he stepped away, his deep voice broke the quiet for the first time. "Eat," he said simply. Then he was gone. The baby grew sick one night, crying endlessly. Fever burned the child's skin. The woman ran through the rain, begging anyone to help, but the town doctor was gone on a wagon call. She ended up on the steps of the sheriff's office, soaked to the bone, holding the baby close. That's when Caleb appeared again, his coat dripping, his horse steaming from the ride. He looked at her, then at the baby's flushed face. Without a word, he took off his hat and crouched beside her. "You'll die out here," he said quietly. "I have nowhere else," she whispered, her voice breaking. He looked at her for a long moment, then held out his hand. "Come with me." She hesitated, but something in his tone made her trust him. She took his hand. He helped her onto his horse and rode through the storm. The baby whimpered against her chest, but the man's steady arms around them felt like the first safety she'd known in months. When they reached his ranch, he led her inside a small, sturdy cabin. The fire was already burning. He gave her a dry blanket, warmed milk for the baby, and set a pot of stew on the stove. She tried to speak to thank him, but he shook his head. "Rest," he said. "Tomorrow we'll see to the child." The next morning the fever had broken. The baby slept soundly, and for the first time, the woman smiled. She stayed. Caleb didn't ask her to, and she didn't ask if she could. She just began sweeping the floor, mending shirts and feeding the animals. He worked the ranch, wordless and steady, while she hummed softly in the kitchen. Days turned into weeks. One afternoon, she found an old photograph on his mantel, a woman with kind eyes, holding a small boy in her lap. She touched the frame gently. "They were yours?" she asked. He looked up from the table. His jaw clenched, and for a long time he said nothing. Then finally, "Fever 2 winters ago." "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded once, his eyes distant. "You got someone looking for you?" She shook her head. "I don't think so. I can't remember anything before the train." He leaned back, arms crossed. "Then maybe that's for the best." They said little else after that, but something changed between them. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was comfortable, almost peaceful. He'd sometimes watch her laugh with the baby and feel something he thought he'd buried for good. One evening, as the sun bled red over the horizon, she stood outside rocking the baby. Caleb came up behind her, leaning against the porch post. The wind carried the scent of rain and wild sage. "You've given him a name?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "No, I thought I should wait. Maybe until I remember who I was." He looked out toward the setting sun. "Sometimes forgetting is the only way to start over." She smiled faintly. "And what about you? You ever think of starting over?" He turned to her then, really looked at her, the tired eyes, the tender way she held the child, the quiet strength in her voice. He took a slow breath. "Maybe I already have." Her heart fluttered. She looked down, shy, but his hand came up gently under her chin, lifting her gaze. "Listen," he said softly, his voice low and certain. "You were left at that station with no name, but you do now." She frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" He hesitated just a moment, then said it. "Anna Ward, if you'll have it." The baby gurgled softly between them, and she felt tears sting her eyes. Your name?" He nodded. "Ours, if you'll stay." For a long moment neither moved. The sky burned orange and gold. The wind rustled through the grass, and the quiet of the plains held its breath. Then she stepped closer and pressed her forehead against his chest. "I'll stay," she whispered. He wrapped his arms around her, and for the first time in years, the silent cowboy let himself breathe. Months passed. The ranch, once lifeless, filled again with laughter and warmth. Anna baked bread and tended the garden. Caleb taught her to ride, to rope cattle, to shoot a rifle straight. They worked side by side, raising the baby, now called Thomas, as their own. Sometimes when the evening light poured through the cabin window, Anna would glance at the locket she still wore. She never opened it anymore. She didn't need to. The name engraved inside no longer mattered. What mattered was the man who had given her another. One summer evening, as the sun sank low, travelers passing through Dry Creek stopped by the Ward Ranch for water. They saw a woman with laughing eyes and a baby on her hip, and a tall, quiet man repairing a fence nearby. The travelers asked if this was the place of the silent rancher who once lived alone. Anna smiled softly. "It was," she said, "but not anymore." They rode on, leaving behind the sound of a child's laughter carried across the plains, and long after the dust settled, the people of Dry Creek still told the story of the nameless woman who found her name at last, because a silent cowboy decided she should have one. And somewhere out on that lonely prairie, where the wind whispered through the grass and the stars burned like fire, Anna Ward rocked her baby to sleep, the locket warm against her heart, proof that sometimes the kindest words in the world are just three, spoken by a quiet man under a crimson sky. "You do now."